Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Isaiah, what's up, man? I'm mute.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that before. I couldn't
okay.
hear you. Are you willing to talk about the Transcendental Argument, or is that not a good topic for this?
We can. I wasn't really planning on that, but what's up?
Well, for one, I've been listening to you for years, and it's always a privilege to talk to you. I've talked to you before, but I was just wanting to know, could we just run it real quick? Could we have like a debate? I mean, I believe in God, but I'm gonna act as an atheist to maybe answer many of my questions.
Okay.
All right, cool. So I'll just start with trying to give an account for logic. So just ask away.
Okay. What's your account for logic? I mean, are you like a materialist atheist?
Yeah, it's going to be materialist. Yeah, a materialist atheist. It would be like my brain is a computer route.
A computer route?
No. I mean, I'm going down that
route. Okay.
Yeah.
Like your brain is a router? Like what? Okay.
Yeah, no. That'd be bad if I started.
Okay, yeah, so, just saying that your brain is that or does something doesn't get you to any kind of epistemic justification for asserting the universality of something like logic.
Okay. When we talk about universality, why can't it be the case that, like, right now I'm looking at, I don't know, my sink, right, and my brain computer tells me that is indeed what I'm looking at, and it's probably the case.
That has nothing to do with universals and the universal character of things that are law-like. So something that's a universal, like the law of identity, which would be necessary for you to predicate any meaningful statements about the sink or whatever at all, the knowledge claims, the assertions that you're making rely on those kinds of categories that are not reducible to physical matter, sense data, nor are they limited to your own direct experience. Because if they are, they're no longer universal and they no longer have a law-like character to them. And so if there are no universals or law-like things like that, then knowledge is impossible.
So when you talk about the laws, maybe could you expand on that a bit? Because like when I think of the laws, I think of it's just a description of the apparent reality that I'm seeing, right? It's not like the laws aren't to be confused with the way reality works. The law is what is describing.
Yeah, but you're missing the point that you can't even make sentences or statements without some kind of universal quantifiers. When you, for example, contrast your personal experience to, quote, reality, you're again invoking something that you think of or are using as a universal statement or universal truth claim. So anytime you say that human knowledge, if you say something like human knowledge is limited or human knowledge comes from sense data, those are still universalized claims, whether you use the word all or not, because it's kind of implicit that it's a universal claim. If it's not a universal claim, or if it doesn't have that level of truth value or that level of strength, then you're really not saying anything other than that my own subjective experience tells me that there's this object in front of me. Well, that isn't.
Okay.
Where does that get you?
I think I'm understanding. So what you're saying is that it would be the case, like if I'm looking at the sink right now, that in fact is a universal claim, because what I am also saying is that no matter where you are in the universe, it is the case that I am looking at the sink.
True, and also a particular can be a universal, like you're saying, but also to make sentences requires other universal categories like time determinations, the possibility of meaning, the mind, a knower, etc. Logic, because sentences require logic. So for you to make a meaningful proposition, which is what all arguments would assume, you need things like grammar and logic, and none of those things are found under a microscope.
Yeah, no, that is true. Okay, yeah, it seems like I need to learn a lot more about universals.
Well, it's not just, that's just one easy example. But I mean, just think something like the law of identity, like for you to be able to pick out the sink in your field of vision from other objects, that's you picking out something and saying that it has that identity as that thing. So presumably then what is the law of identity not a law because it's just relative to you, or is the law of identity true for all possible cognition? Do you see the strength of that argument?
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah.
Because if you deny it, then you're in an even worse situation, and you're just basically saying that identity and meaning are just whatever I say.
Yeah, but then that would undercut justification.
That would undercut the possibility of knowledge, because everything would be purely subjective.
Yeah, okay.
If
Yeah,
everything is purely subjective and relative, you're at a self-refuting state.
No, I mean, no, that does make sense. So what do you really mean by reasoning? Like, what would be your definition of reasoning?
Just the human ability, well, it's a faculty that we have as human beings to come to conclusions and to think critically about the world that we have, because we're made in the image of God.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think that was good.
And I would add that as an atheist or a materialist, that they would have no account of what reasoning is. They just appeal to it, no coherent account of what that is, how it is. I mean, do you find reasoning under a microscope? If Matt Dillahunty cuts my head off, he scalps me and looks at my brain, does he see reasoning? Where's the reasoning molecules in my head, by the way?
I actually asked an atheist that, and the answer they gave me was the electrical signals interpreted by my brain thing. But I mean,
okay, so reasoning is just electrical signals. Well, those are coming and going and temporary. They're never fixed. So
correct.
that would make them not law-like, but rather pure chaos and flux. That's self-defeating.
Well, I got 2 more questions for you. One, so the argument that I understand it is that essentially you make a positive argument for the Christian worldview, and then you have, I guess the way that I'm trying to interpret it is that you examine all the other transcendental categories and the different combinations of them. And
well, you don't have to do all of that. That's a lot of work. You just basically are pointing out that all of the basic transcendental categories don't exist in a vacuum. They kind of go together with the others. Like knowledge, or the possibility of having knowledge, is directly related to a knower of the knowledge. And that's directly related to the faculty of reasoning and thinking. That's directly related to the idea of, the good and the true versus the false. So now you're in the ethics and metaphysics domain. So they're all kind of like function together. They're not like existing on their own. But right. I think for the sake of argument, it's helpful to pick out certain features of the world, like math or law of identity or law of non-contradiction. Those are helpful just as test cases to run the argument. But the argument is like you said, just simply saying that the transcendental categories themselves, since they don't operate in a vacuum or discretely on their own, they require more a bigger thing to ground them as they ground knowledge.
Okay, and how many transcendental categories do you think there would be? Just a guess.
Well, I mean, in classical philosophy, it's like Kant is just taking Aristotle's categories, and so I think Aristotle has 10 categories. That doesn't mean that there's only 10, because you could think of other things that might be possible preconditions for knowledge. Like, for example, I don't think Aristotle lists what Kant calls a transcendental unity of apperception, and that's a fancy word for just a unified experience that the knower has, right? So in other words, for me to have meaningful experience, it kind of assumes that there's some unifying character that's meaningful to my experiences. And this is a good one to talk about, because atheists or anybody like that, like, they usually overlook this because they just assume that this external data that's coming in to their, empirical sense data faculties, they just assume that it's meaningful. Well, how do I know that this one instance of a sense data and experience is meaningful and in some way connected or related to the next 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds of sense data? It's just assumed, right? Oh, but you see, did you directly perceive? Is it under a microscope that you perceive that unity of perception? No, it's assumed. So I think that Aristotle doesn't, philosophy advances to get very deep and technical. So, it might be helpful for people that are new to the argument to not go so far into things like the Kant stuff, because Kant's very confusing, and also his system is kind of a failure. But he does have some of these good insights like this. Like, I don't think that would have been immediately in Aristotle's mind, right? Because like you get in the 1700s philosophers who begin to do linguistic philosophy. And even though there's a little bit of that in the ancient world or in the Middle Ages, it doesn't get as technical and as in depth as it does after the Enlightenment. So philosophers go a lot deeper than the ancient and medieval philosophers did in terms of extreme specificity in analysis. So in other words, transcendental categories might be listed differently by different philosophers, but they're really just grasping at the same idea, which is there's got to be certain things that have to be the case for you to have knowledge at all.
Well, dude, that's awesome. That was all good. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Okay, yeah, no, those are great questions.
And,
Those are great questions.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yep.